Hidden crime stories. The murder of Athena Strand. He was delivering a Christmas present. November 30th, 2022. Paradise, Texas. A quiet rural community in Wise County, about 40 miles northwest of Fort Worth. The kind of place where families know their neighbors, where children play outside without worry, where a FedEx truck pulling into your driveway on a Wednesday afternoon in late November means Christmas is getting closer. The package Tanner Horner was delivering that afternoon contained Barbie dolls, a Christmas gift meant for a 7-year-old girl named Athena Strand. Athena lived at home with her father Jacob and stepmother Ashley. She had been sorting laundry in a converted storage shed that served as her and her sister's bedroom when she disappeared. Ashley Strand thought her stepdaughter was simply hiding when the 7-year-old disappeared from their home. She looked in the bedroom. She called her name. She checked the yard. She did all the things a parent does in the first minutes of a child's absence, the minutes when absence still feels like mischief rather than catastrophe. Athena was not hiding. Tanner Horner arrived at the residence to deliver the Christmas package that afternoon. By the time he drove away, Athena Strand was in the back of his FedEx van. Strand was reported missing, setting off a large search involving more than 200 community members. Then 300. Families from across Wise County drove out to help. They searched fields and creek beds and roadsides with the desperate, organized energy of a community that could not accept what the evidence was beginning to suggest. 2 days later, on December 2, 2022, Wise County Sheriff Lane Aiken announced the arrest of Tanner Lynn Horner, a contract driver for FedEx who had made a delivery to the Strand family home at approximately the time Athena disappeared. That same day, investigators discovered Athena's body about 9 miles from her home. She was 7 years old. She had been strangled. Sheriff Aiken, visibly shaken, addressed the community at a press conference. "It hurts our hearts to know that that child died," he said. "This community does not like losing our children, and we can see it because of all the people who came out and helped us throughout this ordeal." What followed, across 3.5 years of legal proceedings, was the full, devastating account of what Tanner Horner had done in the back of a FedEx delivery truck on a November afternoon in rural Texas. A story so specific in its horror, so complete in its documentation, that when the moment finally came for him to face a jury, he had no defense to offer, only a guilty plea and a question about whether he would live or die for what he had done. On Hidden Crime Stories, we walk every step of this story. From the Christmas present on a driveway to the courtroom in Fort Worth where a jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before deciding that Tanner Horner should be put to death. This story is about Athena Strand, a 7-year-old girl with a whole life ahead of her who was taken in the most ordinary possible moment by the most trusted possible stranger. And it is a story about something we do every single day without thinking twice about it. We open our doors. Stay with me. Before we talk about Tanner Horner, before we discuss the investigation, the confession, the trial, we need to talk about Athena. Because in cases like this one, the victim can become a name attached to a crime rather than a person who existed fully and specifically before the crime happened to her, and Athena Strand deserves better than that. She was 7 years old. She lived in Paradise, Texas, with her father Jacob and her stepmother Ashley. She had a sister. She had friends. She had the particular, specific, utterly irreplaceable character of a 7-year-old who is becoming herself, developing opinions and preferences, and a way of moving through the world that was hers alone. On the afternoon of November 30th, 2022, Athena was folding laundry in the converted storage shed that served as her bedroom when a FedEx driver pulled into the driveway. She was doing a chore, something her family had asked her to do. The most ordinary, domestic, completely safe thing in the world. She stepped outside at some point. Whether she walked out to see what was being delivered, or whether something else drew her to the driveway, is something investigators pieced together from the evidence that followed. What matters is what she could not have known. The man in the FedEx uniform was not what he appeared to be. And the Christmas present he was delivering to her home was the last thing that connected her to the ordinary afternoon she had been living before he arrived. Paradise, Texas, is the kind of community that shows up for its own. When Athena was reported missing, over 200 community members mobilized immediately. Families, neighbors, strangers who simply could not sit at home while a little girl was missing. That number grew to 300. They searched shoulder to shoulder across the fields and roads of Wise County for 2 days. The sheriff would later describe that outpouring with visible emotion, noting the Texas Rangers who escorted Athena's body to the medical examiner's office, one in front and one behind, as a mark of respect for a child the community had lost. That community, the one that showed up, that searched, that carried this, is the backdrop against which this entire story unfolds, and it matters for understanding what the investigation, the trial, and the verdict meant to the people who lived it. Tanner Lynn Horner was 31 years old at the time of his arrest. He was working as a contract FedEx delivery driver in the Paradise, Texas area. He was not someone whose public biography suggested danger. He was not a person with a long visible history of violence or a record that should have set off alarms. He was a delivery driver, a person whose entire professional existence is built on access, on being let past the gate, on the door opening when the truck pulls up. According to an arrest warrant obtained by the Associated Press, Horner initially told authorities he had accidentally hit Strand with his delivery vehicle while backing out of the driveway. He claimed that although Athena did not appear to be seriously injured, he said he panicked, placed her into the back of his van, and strangled her out of fear that she would tell her father what had happened. That was the story he told first. An accident, a panic, a terrible decision made in a fraction of a second by a man who was afraid of consequences. But the prosecution made clear from the opening moments of the sentencing phase that this story was just part of a web of lies. Because the van had a camera inside, jurors watched video showing Horner picking up the child and placing her into the back of the truck. And Athena's voice could be heard on the recording, asking her kidnapper, "What are you doing?" 3 words. From a 7-year-old girl who had just been put in the back of a delivery van by a stranger in a uniform. What are you doing? That question, those 3 words in a child's voice, became the most important piece of evidence in the entire case, not because it required any legal interpretation, but because it made undeniably, permanently clear that what happened in that van was not an accident followed by a panic. It was a child who knew something was wrong and asked about it, and a man who had an answer that none of us will ever be able to fully understand. The investigation that identified Tanner Horner as the suspect moved with remarkable speed. Digital evidence was the key. FedEx delivery trucks are equipped with GPS tracking systems that log location data in real time. Investigators were able to establish precisely where Horner's vehicle had been on the afternoon of November 30, 2022, and that data placed him at the Strand family home at exactly the time Athena disappeared. Investigators identified Horner through digital evidence and a confession. He was brought in for questioning, and when investigators confronted him with what the digital trail had already established, the location data, the timeline, the fact that his truck had been the last vehicle at the Strand home before Athena vanished, he confessed. Initially with the story about the accident and the panic. Then, as the evidence continued to build and the recording from inside the van was reviewed, the full picture emerged. Athena's body was found approximately 9 miles from her home, near Boyd, Texas. She had been strangled. Her nude body had been left in a rural area near the Trinity River. The Wise County Sheriff announced Horner's arrest on December 2, 2022, just 48 hours after Athena was reported missing. The speed of the arrest was a testament to the digital infrastructure now embedded in commercial delivery services. Infrastructure that, in this case, meant the man who had taken Athena could not drive away without leaving a trail that pointed directly back to him. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping and capital murder of a person under 10 years old. He entered a not guilty plea on March 6, 2023. And then the case sat, through the months of legal proceedings that capital cases always require, through the preparation of an overwhelming body of evidence, through the years that passed while Athena's family waited for a courtroom to finally hear what had been done to their daughter. 3.5 years. Until April 7, 2026. Before we go any further, I want to pause for just a moment. Athena Strand was 7 years old. She asked him what he was doing. If this story is sitting with you the way I think it is, take 5 seconds right now and subscribe to Hidden Crime Stories. Every single week, we bring you cases told with the full weight they deserve, centered on the people who matter most. We have more cases coming that you cannot miss. Subscribe right now, and let's get to that courtroom in Fort Worth. Because what happened when Tanner Horner finally faced a jury is something every person watching this needs to witness. April 7, 2026. The Tim Curry Criminal Justice Center, Fort Worth, Texas. The jury had been seated, the evidence had been prepared. The families of Athena Strand had gathered for what everyone expected to be a long, emotionally devastating capital murder trial. Just minutes before evidence presentation was set to begin, Tanner Horner and his attorneys told Judge George Gallagher something that stopped the courtroom. He was pleading guilty. Horner pleaded guilty to aggravated kidnapping and capital murder in the death of Athena Strand. The trial moved immediately into its sentencing phase, with the jury now tasked with a single question: death or life without parole. Legal analyst Namama Rahmani told A&E Crime and Investigation, "In a death penalty case, sometimes you start off on a much stronger foot if you do admit to the murder itself. The strategic logic, if it was logic, was that a jury that heard a defendant take responsibility might be more sympathetic in the penalty phase than a jury that had to fight through weeks of contested evidence to reach the same conclusion. It did not work. Because what the jury heard during the sentencing phase, the evidence that prosecutors presented even after the guilty plea, because in a capital case the evidence must still be heard, was not the kind of thing that generates sympathy. Jurors watched the video from inside the van. They heard the audio recording, a full hour of what had happened inside that truck after Horner placed Athena inside. They heard Athena's voice. They heard her ask what he was doing. Prosecutors also introduced testimony about a separate incident, a prior accusation involving inappropriate behavior toward another child that had not resulted in criminal charges. The defense objected strenuously to this testimony. The defense presented testimony from Horner's family members during the sentencing phase, people who spoke about his background, his history, the circumstances of his life. They were trying to give the jury a reason to choose life over death. On April 16, 2026, prosecutors rested after presenting the audio recording of Athena's murder to the jury. It was, by every account from the courtroom, one of the most devastating pieces of evidence ever presented in a Texas capital case. During the sentencing phase, Horner also attempted to introduce a claim that has followed this case since his arrest, that an alternate personality, a separate inner self he described as distinct from his conscious identity, was responsible for what happened in the van. This claim, described by some observers as an attempt to introduce an informal insanity-adjacent defense during the penalty phase, did not persuade the jury. Because the video showed him picking her up, the audio recorded what followed, and Athena's question, 3 words, a child's voice, remained the most powerful testimony in the room. After hearing more than 2 weeks of evidence, the jurors deliberated for less than 3 hours. Less than 3 hours. For a case that had taken 3.5 years to reach a jury. For a decision that would determine whether a man lived or died. The brevity of the deliberation was itself a statement about the clarity of the evidence, about the weight of what the jury had heard, about the particular kind of certainty that the recording from inside that van had produced. On May 5, 2026, the jury sentenced Tanner Horner to death by lethal injection for the murder of Athena Strand. The sentence was unanimous. In the courtroom, Athena's family had waited 3.5 years for this moment. They had watched the investigation unfold. They had sat through the legal proceedings. They had carried the specific, irreplaceable weight of knowing exactly what had been done to their daughter and waiting for a system to fully reckon with it. Athena's stepmother Ashley, who had been cooking dinner on the afternoon of November 30, 2022, believing her stepdaughter was in her room folding laundry, testified during the sentencing phase. When asked about Athena's murder, she broke down on the stand. "I am so mad at him," she said through tears. "I want to just tear his ass up." Those words, raw, unglamorous, completely unperformed, are the truest things said in any courtroom in this case. Not the legal arguments, not the expert testimony. Those words from a stepmother who had spent 3.5 years living with the knowledge of what had happened to a little girl who had been in her care on a Wednesday afternoon. Tanner Horner now sits on death row in Texas. His mandatory appeals process has begun. Capital cases in Texas follow a lengthy appeals trajectory. It will be years before any execution date is set, and the appeals process may produce additional legal proceedings. But the verdict stands. The jury decided. In less than 3 hours, Athena Strand was 7 years old. and the man who took her from a driveway in Paradise, Texas, on a November afternoon has been sentenced to die for it. Before I give you my final thoughts, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. This is one of the hardest stories this channel has ever told, not because of its complexity, but because of its simplicity. A 7-year-old girl, a Christmas present, a man in a uniform who had been trusted with access to her home. If this story affected you, please leave a comment below right now. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me what you want us to cover next. And please share this video tonight, because Athena's story deserves to be heard by as many people as possible. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Now, here is what I want you to carry from this. I want to say Athena's full name one more time before we close. Athena Strand. 7 years old. Paradise, Texas. November 30th, 2022. She was folding laundry. She stepped outside. She asked a man what he was doing. And I want to sit with those 3 words for a moment, because they tell you everything you need to know about who Athena was in that moment. Not a passive victim, not a child frozen by fear. A 7-year-old girl who encountered something that confused her and asked a direct question about it. What are you doing? The courage in that question, unconscious, instinctive, the natural response of a curious child who has been taught to speak up, is something worth holding on to. It did not save her. Nothing she could have done in that moment would have saved her, because the man in the uniform had already made his decision, but it is the clearest possible window into who Athena was, and it is the thing that the jury heard, sitting in that Fort Worth courtroom, that made the deliberation last less than 3 hours. Now, here is what this story asks of all of us. We live in a world where the boundaries between private and public space have never been more porous. Delivery drivers, rideshare drivers, service workers, contractors. The infrastructure of modern convenience means that strangers with legitimate professional reasons to be at our homes, in our spaces, near our children, are a constant and unremarkable part of daily life. We have built our economy around that access. We extend it automatically, without thought, because almost everyone who rings the doorbell is exactly who they appear to be. Tanner Horner was a delivery driver. He had been trusted by FedEx, by his route, by the simple fact of a uniform and a package, with access to the Strand family's driveway. That access was legitimate. That trust was reasonable. Nothing about the situation, as Ashley Strand experienced it from inside her kitchen, was unusual or alarming. The horror of this case is not that the Strand family did something wrong. They did not. You cannot live in a world where you treat every delivery driver as a potential threat. The system of trust that makes modern life function depends on the vast majority of people who hold positions of ordinary access using that access in ordinary ways. But here is what this case teaches us about children specifically. Athena was alone outside when Horner abducted her. The few minutes between her stepping outside and Ashley realizing she was gone were enough. The most important thing any parent or caregiver can take from this story is not fear of delivery drivers. It is the value of knowing where your children are at all times when strangers are present at or near your home. Not because every stranger is dangerous, almost none of them are, but because the few seconds it takes to keep a child inside, or to step outside with them, or to simply know they are within eye line when a vehicle is in the driveway, is not an unreasonable adjustment to make. Athena's stepmother was cooking dinner. She believed Athena was in her room. She had no reason to think otherwise. There is no version of this story where what happened to Athena was Ashley's fault. None. But the gap between in the house and in the driveway is a gap that this case asks every family to think about. Not in fear, in awareness. Athena Strand asked what he was doing. She deserved an answer that kept her safe. She deserved to grow up. She deserved to finish folding that laundry and come inside for dinner and go to sleep and wake up the next morning with the whole rest of her life still in front of her. She was 7 years old. Her name was Athena. Remember it.